My name is Jessica Simpson, and I never imagined that at 76 years old, I'd be sitting here reflecting on a war I fought quietly within the walls of my own home. You'd think that at this age, life would be peaceful, filled with tea on the porch, soft laughter from the grandkids, and the occasional memory that makes you smile. But for a long time, peace felt like something I had to fight for. I wasn't always this calm. In fact, there were days I wanted to scream, to slam doors, to run away, but I didn't. Because of one reason: my grandson. Let me take you back to when it all started, before everything unraveled. My husband passed away when our son Matt was just a baby. He had been a good man, kind, honest, and loyal. His death left a hole in me so wide I thought I'd never feel whole again. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had the strength to raise a child alone. But every time Matt looked at me with those big eyes, I found it. That little boy became the light that kept me moving forward. I was a career woman, worked as a certified public accountant for over 4 decades. I built a life for us through numbers and long nights, balancing ledgers by day and bedtime stories by night. And somehow, we made it. Years later, Matt grew up to be a fine young man, thoughtful, bright, and hardworking. He landed a job at a major company and eventually introduced me to his longtime girlfriend, Gina. She was a few years older than him, 6 to be exact, but she carried herself with confidence and spoke with clarity. I liked her, at least at first. When Matt proposed, I was over the moon. He deserved happiness. And when they moved into a new house, he asked me something unexpected. "Mom," he said over dinner, "would you consider moving in with us?" I was surprised. "Won't I get in the way? Newlyweds need space, you know." Gina smiled and shook her head. "Not at all. I was the one who suggested it, Jessica." I remember tearing up a little. "Gina, you're very kind. Matt's lucky." Back then, everything felt right. We moved in together, and for a while it was wonderful. We had meals together, laughed over movies, and even started imagining what the future might look like with a child in the picture. When Gina got pregnant, we were overjoyed. She quit her part-time job, which made sense given how tough her morning sickness was. I adjusted my work schedule to support her, handling most of the household chores without a second thought. I didn't mind. I was just happy to be useful. When our little grandchild was born, my heart could have burst. He was perfect. Round cheeks, soft hair, and eyes full of curiosity. We all adored him. But life had other plans. Matt's company decided to open an overseas branch, and they asked him to relocate for a few years. It was a great opportunity for his career, but the timing was rough. He didn't want to leave, especially not with a newborn at home. "I still want to live with this child," he said, hugging his son goodbye at the airport. "Please take care of them, Mom." And just like that, it was me, Gina, and the baby. Friends asked, "Aren't you nervous about living alone with your daughter-in-law?" But honestly, I wasn't. I thought I knew her. I thought we had a bond. I couldn't have been more wrong. At first, Gina seemed grateful. I'd help with night feedings, change diapers, and keep the house running while she rested. But something changed, slowly at first. She began going out more, not for groceries or doctor's appointments, but for hours at a time, often late into the evening. I tried to be patient. She was a new mother. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she was struggling with something internal. But then it became clear. She wasn't really interested in motherhood. She'd leave the baby with me for entire days. Sometimes she'd come home and complain that the house smelled like baby wipes or that I'd cooked something too bland. I bit my tongue more times than I can count. But the turning point came one night when I returned home late from work. I walked into the house and immediately heard the baby screaming. The laundry was untouched, dishes piled in the sink, and Gina? She was fast asleep on the couch, snoring like she hadn't a care in the world. The baby's diaper was soaked through. He was red, scratching himself from the discomfort. I held him close and whispered, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," as I cleaned him up and rocked him back to calm. My heart ached. I wasn't angry. I was devastated. When Gina finally woke up, she groaned, "Ugh, what's with all the noise?" I couldn't believe my ears. "He's your child," I snapped. "He needed you." "I'm tired too, Jessica. Stop acting like a saint." Her words stung, but I bit back my frustration and focused on the baby. He was more important than any argument. But the final straw came a few days later. I had worked late again and was too exhausted to cook a full dinner. I made something simple: rice, vegetables, grilled fish. Gina looked at the plate and scoffed, "Is this it? No meat?" I stared at her, stunned. You haven't lifted a finger all day. I come home from work, take care of your child, and still put food on the table." She rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath. I took a deep breath. "Sit down, we need to talk." She didn't like that, not one bit. I was about to go out. "Sit," I said, this time more firmly. We sat across from each other, the baby playing with a toy nearby. I tried to stay calm, to explain that she needed to take more responsibility, that I couldn't keep doing this alone. Her response? "You know what? I've been wanting to say this for a while. I don't like you, at all. From now on, we'll live as a family without you, so get out of this house. Don't get involved with us anymore." She stood up and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. I was frozen. I looked down at the baby, my sweet, innocent grandson, who had turned toward the door, startled. He toddled over to me and looked up, confused. "Mama?" he asked, pointing at the door. Tears welled in my eyes. I held him tightly. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "You didn't deserve this." And in that moment, I knew I couldn't leave him, not with her, not like this. Something had to change. The next morning, I called in to take a day off from work. I needed a plan. I needed to protect my grandson. And if that meant walking away from this house, I would. But not without making sure everything I'd built didn't fall into the wrong hands. Later that day, I sat Gina down again. "I'm leaving," I said plainly. She raised her eyebrows. "Finally realized you're a nuisance, huh?" I ignored her attitude. "But before I go, we need to handle a few legal matters. The house, the insurance, the mortgage, they're all in my name. Let's change that." For the first time, she looked surprised. She wasn't expecting that kind of compliance. But then her expression changed into something smug. "Gladly," she said. "If that means cutting ties, I'm all for it." She had no idea what was coming. We spent the next couple of days handling paperwork. We visited the city office, updated registrations, and transferred everything, ownership, utilities, documentation, over to her name. By the end of it, Gina looked positively triumphant. She believed she had won, that I was walking away, tail between my legs, leaving her with the house and the life she wanted without me in it. But the real surprise was waiting just around the corner. Matt came home. He arrived a few days earlier than expected, catching Gina completely off guard. She stood in the living room, stunned. "Matt?" she gasped. "Why are you here? What happened to the overseas branch?" He stepped forward, calm but firm. "I came back early. Mom called me and told me everything." Gina's face paled. "Told you what? There's nothing to tell." "Don't lie to me," he said sharply. "I know what you've been doing." It had taken everything in me to tell Matt the truth. I hadn't wanted to burden him while he was working so hard abroad, but I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. And to my surprise, Matt didn't hesitate. Once he heard what was happening, he told his boss everything. And to my eternal gratitude, his boss arranged for him to return immediately. Matt stepped closer to Gina now, and his presence alone was enough to shake her. "Jessica doesn't contribute financially to the house," Gina tried to say, her voice rising in panic. "She nags constantly, and I'm tired from taking care of the baby." "Stop," Matt cut her off. "You don't know the first thing about what my mom does." I stood silently, letting Matt speak for both of us. "Our household," he said, almost laughing. "It's been held together by her, not you. You thought my paycheck was covering everything? You thought you were living here thanks to me?" Gina blinked. "Isn't it?" "No," Matt said flatly. "I gave all my earnings to my mom so she could save for our son. She's been the one paying for everything. Mortgage, groceries, bills, every dime." Gina looked stunned, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't believe it. "And why do you think we transferred everything into your name this week?" Matt asked, tilting his head. "To get her out of the house?" she mumbled. Matt smirked. "No, it was a setup. We needed everything in your name for one reason: divorce." With that, he pulled out the divorce papers and dropped them on the coffee table. The color drained from Gina's face. "What? You're divorcing me?" "Yes," he said coldly. "You don't get to treat my mother like trash. You don't get to neglect your child and act like the victim." "But Matt, wait." He held up a hand. "Save it, it's over." She stood there, trembling, searching for words. "But the house, it's in my name now. You can't just kick me out." "That's the point," I said gently. "You wanted me gone. You wanted the house, and now it's your problem, along with the mortgage." Gina's face twisted in disbelief. Matt continued, "Do you think we didn't plan for this? Every step we've taken was to protect my son and my mother. You wanted control? Well, congratulations. It's all yours now. The debt, the bills, the upkeep. Good luck." She stumbled back onto the couch, her legs giving way. For a moment, she looked utterly defeated. And that would have been enough, but then came the final blow. There's more, Matt said. I know about the affair. Gina looked up, her mouth gaping. What? I know about the man you've been seeing, your little late-night outings. They weren't exactly subtle. I reached into my bag and placed a small recorder and a stack of printed photos on the table. You didn't think I'd notice? I said. All those nights out claiming you needed fresh air or girl time? I had you followed and recorded. The pictures showed Gina entering and leaving a hotel with the same man multiple times. And the recordings? Let's just say they spoke volumes. Gina clutched the edge of the table, visibly shaking. Why? Matt asked softly. Why did you even marry me? She couldn't answer. He looked away, disgusted. And don't think you're walking away with anything, I added. All the savings? They're in our grandson's name. Accounts set up and protected from the beginning. You won't see a penny. But that's not fair. I stood. No, what's not fair is what you did to this family, to your child. Gina was crying now, her voice cracking. Please, please don't do this. I messed up. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what I was doing. Matt shook his head. You knew. You just didn't care. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. With the mountain of evidence we had, Gina didn't stand a chance. Matt sued for custody and won. We also pressed charges for child neglect. Her name might have been on the house, but with the mortgage payments and no income, she eventually declared bankruptcy. What happened to her after that? I don't know. I stopped following her story. All I cared about was the child she left behind. The boy who ran to me when she stormed out, who wiped my tears with his tiny hands and said, Grandma, there. That boy saved me. And I would spend the rest of my life making sure he never had to feel abandoned again. Time passed after this divorce, and with each new day, our home slowly became a place of light again. Matt threw himself into fatherhood with a kind of passion that surprised even me. He had always been a loving son, but now I saw something deeper, a drive to protect, to be present, to rebuild what had once been so fragile. He made breakfast every morning, packed little snack boxes with cut-up fruit and animal-shaped sandwiches. He stayed up late helping with puzzles, reading bedtime stories, singing lullabies off-key. Our grandson, now 4, looked up at him with the kind of trust I used to see in Matt's own eyes when he was little. The house felt different. There were still echoes of pain, shadows from the past that occasionally crept in when I walked past a certain room or caught the scent of a familiar perfume, but they no longer controlled us. They no longer defined the space we lived in. Instead, the walls now held new memories, like the time Matt and I built a blanket fort in the living room and the little one called it our castle, or the rainy Saturday we baked cookies and ended up covered in flour, laughing until we cried. I returned to work part-time, more for the sense of rhythm than necessity. But my heart belonged here, in this house, with my boys. People often say the worst of times bring out the best in people, and I believe that. Matt had transformed, not just into a stronger father, but into a more grounded man. He no longer saw life as something to chase. He saw it as something to nurture. And me? I rediscovered parts of myself I thought had been buried beneath duty. I began painting again, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a walking group at the community center and met women around my age who had their own stories of heartbreak and resilience. We exchanged stories, sometimes tears, but always encouragement. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. One summer afternoon, as we all sat in the backyard sipping lemonade, Matt turned to me with a thoughtful look. Mom, he said, I've been thinking about dating again. I blinked, a little surprised. Oh? He chuckled. I know. It's early. But I'm not talking about rushing into anything. I don't want to be alone forever. And I want him, he nodded toward our grandson, to see what love looks like. My heart warmed. You deserve love, Matt, I said. Real love. Someone who sees you and values the man you are. Just go slow. Be smart. He grinned. I learned from the best. And so he started putting himself out there again, slowly, cautiously. There were some awkward dates, some mismatched intentions, but then there was someone. Her name was Rachel. She was a school counselor, patient and gentle, with a laugh that could calm a storm. The first time I met her, she brought a homemade pie and remembered my favorite tea. More importantly, she didn't try to fill shoes that weren't hers. She created her own space with her own love, and over time it became obvious she belonged. Rachel and Matt dated for over a year before he proposed. This time it was different. No flashy gestures or dramatic declarations, just a quiet evening in, a heartfelt letter, and a ring placed gently in her hand. When they told our grandson, he clapped his little hands and said, "Now I'll have two moms." I teared up at that. They married in a small ceremony in our backyard, under the old oak tree that Matt used to climb as a kid. Rachel wore a simple ivory dress, and Matt looked happier than I'd ever seen him. I stood beside them, holding my grandson's hand, watching two people commit not just to each other, but to rebuilding a life together. After the ceremony, Rachel pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. "Jessica, thank you for trusting me with your family." I hugged her tightly. "Thank you for giving my son a second chance at joy." Years continued to roll by, each one faster than the last. Seasons changed, hair turned grayer, and little feet grew into big ones. Eventually, my grandson was a teenager, kind, respectful, full of curiosity. He called me Grandma Jess and told his friends I made the best pancakes in the world. We stayed close, despite his growing independence. Then, this spring, he came to me with eyes sparkling like his father's once had. "Grandma," he said, "I want to tell you something." I leaned in. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I'm getting married." My heart skipped. I reached for his hand, now larger than mine. "Oh, my boy." He smiled shyly. "She's amazing. You'll love her. She reminds me of you. She's strong, smart, and kind." Tears welled in my eyes as I pulled him into a hug. In that moment, every pain, every heartbreak, every sacrifice, it all felt worth it. Because here he was, a full-grown man with a good heart, ready to start a new chapter with someone who truly loved him. The cycle of family, of growth, of healing, it had come full circle. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for sure. I had won. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with love, with resilience, with grace. And as I watched my grandson walk into his future, hand in hand with the woman he loved, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for the strength to endure, for the courage to stand up, and for the family we had saved. After my grandson shared his big news, I spent that whole night wide awake, lying in bed with a bittersweet kind of ache in my chest. I kept thinking, how did we get here? From a time when my home was filled with resentment and cold shoulders, to now, where laughter echoed through the halls and love felt like something you could reach out and touch. It had been a long road, twisted, rocky, uncertain. But somehow, we had made it through. The day I met his fiancée, I saw what he meant. Her name was Lily. She was everything he had said and more. Soft-spoken, but not shy. Fierce when it mattered. She treated me with warmth and sincerity, not because I was his grandmother, but because she genuinely respected the story that had shaped our family. When she hugged me that first day and said, "I've heard so much about you, Jessica. He says you're the reason he became the man he is," I had to step aside and collect myself before I cried in front of everyone. She was raised by a single mother, too. Maybe that's why she understood us so well. We didn't have to explain ourselves to her. She just got it. As the wedding planning went on, I mostly stayed on the sidelines. I didn't want to be the overbearing grandmother. But one day, Lily asked if we could talk, just the two of us. We sat out on the porch, the same swing where I'd once rocked my grandson when he was teething and crying through the night. "I just wanted to ask you something," she said softly. I smiled. "Of course. When we have kids," she paused, "would you be okay being a big part of their lives too? I know you've done this before, and I would really love it if our kids got to know you the way Matt and your grandson did." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The air around us seemed to still. "Yes," I finally whispered, tears in my eyes. "I would be honored." It was strange, you know. All those years I feared being unwanted, feeling like a burden, and now here was this beautiful young woman, my soon-to-be granddaughter-in-law, inviting me to stay in their circle, not just as a relative, but as something essential. The wedding took place in early autumn. The same oak tree still stood tall in the backyard, now surrounded by family and friends who had watched us grow, stumble, and stand up again. As I watched them exchange vows, I thought about the long, winding journey we had taken to reach this moment. Gina, once so certain she'd carved me out of the picture, was now just a name from another life. I never heard from her again after the divorce proceedings. I knew she had faced bankruptcy and legal consequences for child neglect, and that was enough closure for me. Forgiveness? I'll admit that part took longer. There were days I wanted to let go of the bitterness, to rise above the pain and say, "I forgive you." But I also knew that forgiveness isn't always about letting someone off the hook. Sometimes it's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. So in time, I forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Matt thrived in his role as both father and husband. He never missed a school meeting, a recital, or a game. He made time for board games, late-night talks, and Sunday breakfasts. He healed in his own way, slowly, steadily, becoming not just the father his son needed, but the man he always had the potential to be. And Rachel? She remained the steady hand and soft place to land in our family. She brought grace to our days, balance to our chaos, and love to every corner of our lives. She once said to me during a quiet evening when we were folding laundry together, "I'm not trying to replace anyone, Jessica. I just want to add." And she did, beautifully. We found our rhythm. Birthdays became joyful celebrations again. Holidays were filled with matching pajamas, too much food, and card games that lasted long into the night. I would sit back, sometimes unnoticed, just watching, taking it all in like a movie I never wanted to end. The house, which once echoed with arguments and uncertainty, now felt like home again. One day, years later, my grandson brought his first child over to visit, a daughter, with eyes just like his. They named her Hope. Fitting, isn't it? He placed her in my arms with the same tenderness I once gave him, and in that moment, time folded in on itself. I saw the past, the present, and the future, all in the face of that tiny baby girl. "Grandma Jess," he said, voice full of emotion, "you were the glue that held us together." I looked down at Hope, then back at him. "No," I replied gently, "you were the reason I didn't give up." That's what people don't always understand. We go through life thinking strength means standing tall, unbending. But true strength? It's waking up day after day when your heart is heavy and your soul is tired. It's showing up, for your family, for yourself, when no one's clapping, when no one's even looking. It's raising your head when you've been told to sit down. It's love, the stubborn, quiet kind. Now, in these golden years of my life, I find myself surrounded by that kind of love every single day. From Matt, who calls every evening just to check in. From Rachel, who still brings me tea just the way I like it. From my grandson, who makes sure I never feel alone. From Lily and Hope, who remind me that legacies aren't built through wealth, but through kindness, sacrifice, and perseverance. I don't have regrets anymore. Not about staying, not about fighting, not even about the pain. Because it all brought us here. To this house, this family, this peace. I often sit by the window in the early morning hours, watching the sunlight pour in, thinking of all the women like me, mothers, grandmothers, caretakers, who've been overlooked, pushed aside, underestimated. To them I say this: you are not invisible. You are the roots that hold the tree. You are the strength behind the smiles. You are the quiet heroes whose stories deserve to be told. So tell them, live them, own them, because even when the world tries to write you out, you can still reclaim the pen, just like I did. My name is Jessica Simpson. I'm 76 years old. I survived betrayal, protected my family, and helped rebuild a legacy of love from the ground up. And if that's not power, I don't know what is.